These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they're described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. Yesterday, my fiancé and I went for a hike in a forest. When I returned, I learned I was missing for 10 years. Have you ever spent years of your life with someone just to find out none of it was real? I had met Andrew when I was 22, working as a bartender for a shitty hole-in-the-wall bar. He was an incredibly outgoing individual that effortlessly brightened the day of anyone who was within 15 feet of him. He had made the lonely closing shift of a dead Tuesday enjoyable, and after I got off of work, we met up for coffee and waffles at a nearby diner. The chemistry we had was unlike anything I had ever experienced before, and it wasn't long before we began dating. Andrew became my rock that I could always rely on to keep me grounded when the rest of the world was caught up in a squall of chaos. He embraced my love of B-movie horror, and I accepted his enthusiasm for the outdoors after weeks of convincing on his part. Andrew was the life of the party, and while there were times that I just wanted to stay in and binge slasher movies, he would tease me for being a homebody and drag me out of the house to meet up with one of his never-ending swaths of social circles for bowling, laser tag, house parties, or his absolute favorite, the late-night hike through the forest that stood behind a shitty bar I had worked at when we met. It had been a major milestone for me when I quit the bar 6 months after Andrew and I met. With his support and encouragement, I started my own business in a niche field that I was actually passionate about. While the money isn't best, I love the work I do, and even the worst days are still better than having to mop up bodily waste from someone who had too much to drink. At a 40th anniversary showing of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Andrew proposed to me during the Damn It, Janet scene. His collection of friends, who had grown on me fast and became my friends as well, hooted and cheered for us and took us out for celebratory drinks after the show. Since that chance encounter 2 years previously, my life had become my own personal heaven. The work I did now was fulfilling. I had an amazing new group of friends, and I was now engaged to the best man I had ever met. Hey, I found a perfect place we should go for a nice picnic and hike. Andrew told me as I was grabbing the last load of laundry from the ancient dryer in Andrew's basement. I was hoping that we could just stay in for the day, Andy. Since I moved in, it feels like we have been going nonstop. I replied, tired but not annoyed at the suggestion. After his proposal, I moved into Andrew's 2-bedroom house. It was quaint, but there always seemed to be another little project that needed to be tackled. With both of our work schedules, there never seemed to be enough time in the day to fix all of the little quirks the house had. "Oh, come on, Christy," he said, wrapping his arms around me and giving the side of my neck a kiss. "Wouldn't it be nice to actually enjoy the 3-day weekend we have to actually get out and have some personal time together?" I moaned as his soft lips and blonde facial hair brushed against the side of my neck. All right, I guess it would be nice to spend time together, just the two of us. Despite moving in together, we hardly had any time to ourselves. The mass of friends were constantly inviting us over and out to celebrate the engagement and to offer help with planning the wedding. It had left us little time to ourselves, and the chance to be alone in nature would be nice. This place we're going to has a nice little spring with a few nooks and crannies out of sight from the main trails. Andrew informed me as he hurriedly threw supplies into his hiking bag. The mischievous look on his face made my face redden. "Andy, you naughty boy," I said before playfully swatting at his butt. He returned the gesture with a pinch of my own, but before tossing the bag over his shoulder and nearly dragging me to my car. During the 3-hour drive to the national park that we would be hiking through, I had dozed off. As we finally arrived, Andrew woke me with an excited expression. Here we are, miles and miles of trails. A chance to really connect with nature. He beamed with a smile that brought one to my own face. "Where did you even hear about this place?" I asked, shaking the last of sleep from my eyes before sitting forward. "Sam and Frankie were telling us about it the last time we went bowling. Don't you remember?" Not really. With all of the friends we have and ideas tossed around, it is hard to keep track of everything. Lucky for you, I have a steel cage for a mind, he responded, lightly tapping his temple with a finger. More like a rusty bear trap, I teased as I mocked a rusty trap, closing with my hands. We shared a laugh before he parked, and we set out for our hike. Andrew had planned a long trek that would bring us back to the car a little before dark. I was glad I had worn an old outfit so that I wouldn't have to worry about getting covered in mud. When I asked about who would be doing the driving back home after we hiked all day, and he eased my worry with the promise of a stay at the motel, we had passed 20 minutes before we arrived. A place I would have seen had I not fallen asleep. With satisfaction at his call ahead and carefully laid plans, we set off into the forest for our day of just the two of us. Isn't that the same outfit you wore when we met? Andrew asked, his eyes feasting up and down on my body. Yeah, I thought I'd just throw on some old clothes since you wanted to go on an intense hike, I replied, snapping my fingers to get his attention. We both laughed as we ventured further down the trails. An odd thing I noticed while we hiked was the strange absence of other people while we hiked. I thought you wanted time together, not with a horde of others. Andrew said as we stopped at the top of a cliff with an old picnic table for people to rest before beginning their descent towards the spring. Of course I want time without a ton of other people. I just think it is strange that we haven't seen anyone else while we have been here. I mean, at IS a holiday weekend, you would think we would have passed by some other wilderness enthusiast or gun-ho parents dragging their kids along to get away from technology for once in their life. This is a pretty big place. We probably have passed by others, but just didn't notice them, Andrew said as he sat his bag down on the table and stretched his arms. I smiled as he took off his shirt and stretched his taut form. I took a few steps towards him and gave him a peck before I spoke again. Take a picture with me, I said, leaning against him and fishing my phone from my pocket. As he wrapped an arm around me, I lifted the phone up and took a picture of us. As I went to take another, a large buck jumped out from behind a nearby tree, startling us both. In slow motion, I watched as my phone leapt from my hands and down the cliffside to the unwelcoming arms below. With a faint crack from below, I could feel my heart drop to my stomach. Fuck, I dropped my fucking phone. That stupid fucking deer made me drop my phone. God damn it, I could kill that shitty fucking thing. I yelled out in frustration. Whoa there, I think you might have broken a commandment there, Andrew said, placing a hand on my shoulder. I'm glad you think this is such a joke, Andrew. I'm not trying to make a joke out of it. I am sure we will be able to recover any photos that are on your phone. Plus, it was old anyways. I'm pretty sure you have had the same phone since we met. I know you've been wanting to upgrade for a while, but haven't really had a chance. He said as diplomatically as he could. We made our way down to where we were sure the phone had fallen, and luckily we were able to find it. The phone had dived straight into the soft embrace of rocks and branches, and the shattered screen was more than enough evidence of how useless it would be. Andrew pulled a plastic bag that had once contained trail mix and placed the destroyed phone inside before stashing it away in his hiking bag. First thing tomorrow, we will go and get you a brand new phone. The best one they got, even if it means I got to sell a kidney to get it for you, Andrew said, trying to cheer me up, obviously aware of my disappointment at losing the collection of memories of our life together that had been gathered on my phone. We continued on towards the springs, crossing over an old wooden bridge that created and groaned with every step as we crossed over it. The entirety of the short time we spent crossing it, my whole body was on edge at the overwhelming sensation of the bridge threatening to collapse at any moment. With the momentary hazard past, we found our way to a pleasant spring resting beside a cliffside. The gurgle of water leaking out and falling down onto the rocks below created a serene background besides the rustling wind and crunching of leaves and twigs as we approached it. Leaning forward, Andrew cupped his hand and brought a handful of spring water towards his mouth before sipping at it. Are you sure you should be drinking that? I asked, thinking about what things could be contained in that water. You drink spring water that's bottled with millions of microplastics in it. At least this is straight from the source, Andrew said as he splashed his face with the spring water. You know, there's a little overhang here that we could. Andrew trailed off as he made a gesture with his hands. I'm not really feeling up to it. I am still irritated about dropping my phone and don't think I am in the right headspace for that, I said, noticing a momentary flash of rage cross Andrew's face before it shifted to an understanding look of disappointment. "Well, you should at least try this water." He gestured to the water as he spoke before glancing absently in the distance. I tried a small sip of the water, and the taste was heavy with a strange metallic taste. Just before I was about to comment, Andrew was already stepping off towards the trail. When we approached another bridge, I insisted that Andrew lead the way as it spanked across a rather steep decline. After he proved the structural integrity of it, I began crossing for myself. Just as I made it halfway through, a horrid crack from the wood echoed through the air. As I fell through the bridge, my hands stretched out to catch myself. The nails on my left hand dug into the wood before being ripped out as my weight jerked my body below. In the briefest of moments, I looked out towards Andrew. A malicious smile greeted me as I tumbled towards the earth below and was embraced by darkness. As I regained consciousness, I was greeted with the sight of a stag skull wrapping its long tongue around the bleeding fingers of my left hand. I screamed out in terror, only to be greeted with Andrew's worried face gracefully holding my bandaged left hand. "Thank God you're okay," Andrew said, slowly setting my hand down and helping me sit forward. My clothes caked in dirt and a long tear down the right side of my jeans with scrapes and cuts leading to the missing shoe on my right foot. I tried to reply, but he hushed me to conserve my energy. He told me he was going to climb back up and try to call for help as he didn't have any signal where we were. I tried to beg him to help me back up, but he was already walking away before I could form the words. I raised my undamaged hand to my head and was greeted with a sharp pain on the side of my head and a small wet patch of blood. Panic racing throughout my body, I forced myself to my feet. It felt like hours since Andrew had gone off for help, and it was now well into the night. I stumbled my way through the overgrowth and began my slow ascent up the hillside back towards the trail. Upon finally reaching the trail, surrounded in the darkness of night, I looked around for any trace of Andrew only to be greeted by silence. The sounds of wind or wildlife were missing, and the only audible noise was my labored breathing and rapid heartbeat drumming in my ears. Dragging my way back to the spring, I greedily drank from the water, ignoring the odd aftertaste. Glancing at a small pool of water at my feet, the shadowy reflection I saw was a skeletal form of myself. I turned away as tears filled my eyes. Pain rippled through my body as I shambled through the dark, my head swimming as my vision blurred. "Christy, where are you?" Andrew yelled out in the distance before he rounded a corner, coming into view. Calling out for me in Andrew's voice was an 8-foot monster. Legs bent backwards connected to a skeletal torso draped in baggy flesh that stretched and shifted to attempt to mimic the human form. The swollen and bulbous head had 2 antlers poking out as the mouth of broken teeth cluttered together in the attempt to form a smile as the thing hunched over to greet me. I was stunned in a silent horror as the beast with Andrew's voice reached out to me. "You had," and he said, "read." The familiar voice struggled to say through gnarled teeth as charred hands wrapped around my wrists. I yanked my hands back as adrenaline scattered my body away from the demented form. I ran away, heart pounding, panic and tears blurring my vision almost as much as the leaves and branches that smacked my face as I escaped in a direction that I hoped would lead to freedom. Atop the cliffside where I had dropped my phone, I paused long enough to catch my breath. Leaning against the picnic table was an old metal trekking pole with electrical tape wrapped around the worn-out handle. I grabbed the ancient hiking stick and leaned against it before starting back out of the forest when Andrew pulled himself over the cliffside. Without thinking, I brought the brass mud tip of the pole down onto Andrew's amorphous face, knocking a chunk of fleshy clay off in the process. Andrew dropped to his knees with flakes of ash rising from his body. The blob of his head formed into a grainy recreation of the face I had stared into for countless hours since we met at the bar all those years ago. "I love you," spoken to me in a voice similar to that of an animal mimicking the words of a person. Smoke rose from the missing chunk in his head before his body fell into a confusing blend of shapes that I couldn't decipher. Tears streaming from my eyes, I turned away from my fiancée and fled from the forest around me. As I shuffled past the edge of the forest, I was greeted with the familiar sight of the bar I had met Andrew at so long ago. A small group of people smoking outside noticed me immediately and rushed over to me as I collapsed. The last of the adrenaline spent as safety from my living nightmare finally embraced me. I had been missing for 10 years. On the magical night, I had met Andrew and thought I had begun an amazing life with my soulmate. I had, in reality, closed the bar after an empty night and walked directly into the forest behind the bar in a trance-like state. When my car was found the following morning by the bar owner, she called my phone to see if I was having car troubles the night before. When I didn't answer, she checked the security footage to find me walking off into the forest. Her concern heightened as the grainy video displayed a strange shadow figure at the edge of the trees, seemingly luring me towards it. For 6 months, they searched the forest only to find my damaged phone and my lost shoe. The worst was assumed, and my missing persons poster had circulated the state, but after all these years, I was assumed dead. Miraculously, I had somehow survived, vastly malnourished at 70 pounds, patches of hair missing, several poorly healed scars littered my body. The worst of which were the scars around my wrists and ankles that remind me too much of rope burn scars. The implications as terrifying as the monstrous forms Andrew had taken. There had never been an Andrew. I try to tell myself that every day, but I still have all of these amazing memories of someone who truly loved me and all of the memories we created together with friends. When I have explained the memories I have of the time since I left the bar all those years ago, I have been told it was my mind trying to protect itself, creating an imaginary world where everything was perfect to shield me from the hell I was actually living. Even as those memories begin to fade and I accept the reality that there never was an Andrew, I still miss him. I loved Andrew. He was my soulmate. When I wake up drenched in sweat from the night terrors of that final hike, one thought still lingers. What would have happened had I continued the fantasy with Andrew? Would I have ever escaped? Or would I still be lost in the forest? Story 2. Remember those creepy chain emails from the early mid-2000s? I got one this morning. Maybe you're too young or too old to know what I'm talking about. So I'll explain first. Basically, somebody sends out an email with a subject line like, "Keep reading. Do not ignore." And then the message itself will contain some kind of short horror story. Something about how a schoolgirl was pushed down a well, and if you didn't repost it or forward it to X amount of people, she'd come crawling out of your toilet and drag you down into the pipes. Something like that. They all typically follow a similar formula. The first time I got one of them was back in middle school. Not an email, but a Facebook post that popped up on my feed. I don't exactly remember what the story was, just that it terrified me enough at the time that I actually did repost it. Something my friends completely roasted me for after the fact. But hey, no demon girl ever came crawling out of my toilet. So who's to say I didn't make the right call? Obviously, the entire concept of these chain mails, or scare mails, was pretty dumb and juvenile. And most of the stories were so terribly written that they could only ever work on skittish 13-year-olds. But as dumb as they were still entertaining enough to engage with back in the day. It was fun to just fuck around and pretend they were real. Core childhood memories. So this morning I was sitting at my desk, watching YouTube while sipping coffee. My typical routine before work. Before leaving, I did a quick scan through my emails. Nothing unusual. There was an invite to a wedding, a newsletter from my old university, my boss complaining about some bullshit. But right before I was about to close my laptop, something new landed in my inbox. It was from an address I didn't recognize. Just one word in the subject line. Sorry. A bit weird. A bit concerning. Probably malware. I barely respond to the emails that I actually have to. Why would I bother with this? I ended up clicking on it anyway. Life has been a bit monotonous recently. Maybe this would prove to be something interesting. The message was only a few sentences long. I'll paste it below. One night a woman was hit by a speeding car at night. The driver was intoxicated and did not call the police. Instead, he dragged her bleeding body down into the sewers and left her there to die. They found her body 2 days later and brought it into the morgue, where they cleaned her up and tucked her away. But when they went to take her out 2 weeks later, she was missing, her empty body bag filled with stinking sewage. If you do not forward this to 5 others by midnight, she will be in your room tonight. She will seek vengeance. This is not a joke. You know what you did. I think I laughed out loud after reading it. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd seen one of these. What a blast from the past. Albeit a bit more intense than the ones I remembered seeing as a kid, but I suppose that these things evolve over time. I was still a bit perturbed that it had been sent to my work email. But then again, I work at a pretty big company, and it probably wasn't a terribly hard thing to find. The email contained an attachment as well. A single PNG file named her. I just figured it was going to be some AI-generated image of a demon woman. An attempt at a cheap scare in order to prolong the joke. So I decided to humor the sender by opening it up. But there was nothing there. Just a plain, black image. Well, let down. I didn't think about it much for the rest of the day. Work was stressful, and I had to force myself to endure a boxing class afterwards. By the time I got home, I was ready to eat dinner and just pass out. After eating, I was lying on my couch, sipping sangria while messaging this girl, Elisa, that I'd matched with on Hinge. I was having trouble coming up with things to talk about, so I mentioned the email. She was about the same age as me, so I figured she'd get a kick out of it, which she did. She gave me her own email and asked me to forward it to her. She wanted to see it. Just curious. So I sent it over. Then I put my phone down and went to take a shower. When I checked my phone again, she'd sent another message. Holy shit, that's terrifying. I messaged her back something like, I know, right? I'm shitting bricks just thinking about it. But she told me she wasn't joking, and that she wasn't talking about the story. Look at the image again, and turn your brightness all the way up. Look closely. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to read before going to bed, but I went ahead and did so. I opened up my email and then re-downloaded the file. Then I turned the lights off and raised the brightness on my phone as high as it could go. I stared intently at the screen. It took some squinting, but I was able to see it. Elisa was right. It was absolutely fucking terrifying. You still couldn't see much, but you could see just enough. A set of floating teeth, just barely reflecting the minimal light there was. The crescent shape suggested a smile. 2 eyes hovered above. Both of them were unnaturally wide, as if they were actively being pried open by unseen hands. Immediately, I turned the lights back on. You know that feeling you get when you dig into your pockets, and your wallet or phone isn't there? I was feeling something similar to that, but with an added layer of dread. The details just didn't add up. Was the email a joke or a genuine attempt at a scare? It was too terribly written to be serious. But if it was a joke, then why was this image the creepiest shit I'd ever seen? Elisa sent another message, saying that she'd used Lightroom to lift the exposure, make the image as bright as possible. I stared at her second email, sitting in my inbox before opening it up. And this is the point where any humor or nostalgia was completely sucked away from the situation. The image was still extremely dark, but enough details had been revealed for it to be somewhat clear that it was a woman's face. Well, kind of. More like something imitating a woman. Something extremely uncanny. It felt like my brain was trying to convince me that it was actually a mannequin, mostly due to the paper white skin. But the longer I stared at it, the less likely that seemed to be. Because I'd never seen a mannequin with an expression like that. Something so hateful, so evil. It didn't even seem possible for any person or machine to recreate. A smile was there, though the jaw was clenched, the teeth pressed tight together. The nostrils were large, flared wide open, each one like a shotgun barrel. The eyes were owl-like, stretched out in a painful-looking way. But the brows were drawn down, the skin furrowed heavily between them, as if this person were actually supposed to be squinting. A contradiction of features. I don't know how else to explain it. I tried doing a reverse image search, but came back empty. I know that's not definitive proof of anything, but I've been hoping that at least an obscure art form would have turned up. The picture was just so odd and frightening that being able to connect it to something would have maybe settled my nerves a bit. Whoever had conjured this whole thing up was good, because it had freaked me out in a way that I really didn't like. I was standing in the kitchen, just mulling it all over when somebody knocked at my door. I checked the time, seeing 10 past midnight. Weird, but all right. I checked the peephole, seeing a cop standing at my door. Even fucking weirder. I opened it, and immediately she asked me to step outside. No explanation, just this dead serious look in her eyes. as if she thought I was hiding a body somewhere. I asked her what this was about. "Come, out, now," she said, her voice now barely above a whisper. "Just do it." Maybe I'd done something while I was blackout drunk? In any case, I obliged. As soon as we were out in the hall, the cop shut the door behind me. She gestured for me to follow her, and I did. The first question she asked me once we'd made it outside to the parking lot was whether I lived by myself or not. I told her to myself. She took a deep breath, introduced herself as Officer Viana before explaining that she had been called over here to deal with a noise complaint. I knew who she was talking about. A guy named Sam living 3 doors down from me. Rich college kid. Kind of annoying as fuck, but I wasn't the one who called it in. After warning him to shut the music off, she'd walked outside to leave when she looked over at the window leading into my bedroom. I live on the 1st floor, and my unit's right beside the entrance. If you were about average height, you'd be able to see into it from the lot. She said that I hadn't closed my blinds and that I'd left my window open and that the streetlights were just bright enough for her to be able to see inside. She said that she saw the outline of a figure standing by the door, completely still, as if they were waiting for somebody to enter. She said it didn't look like a doll or mannequin, that she got the sense it was something dangerous. The entire time she spoke, she had a hand on her weapon, her eyes continuously darting between me and the window. I did remember leaving the windows and blinds open. It's a bad habit, but somebody would have had to break through the mesh screen in order to get in. I would have heard it. Sam's music bleeding through the walls would not have been loud enough to muffle it. Not a chance. And then I realized that I'd gone into my bedroom to reach the shower about half an hour before she showed up. I hadn't seen anything then, but what if I just hadn't looked? Honestly, I didn't want to believe what she was telling me, because if it was true, then what the fuck was I dealing with? We were standing too far away from the building for me to be able to see anything. So I began walking over to get a look at it for myself. But Viana stopped me. "You probably don't want to see it," she told me. "For your own sake, I wouldn't recommend it." Her tone was earnest enough for me to believe her. I asked her what I was supposed to do then. She told me to just wait. She'd already called for backup, and once they arrived, they'd go ahead and enter my apartment and investigate it. It didn't seem like I had another option, so I told her all right. At this point, I'm still hanging on to skepticism, more as a coping tool than anything else. The backup arrived nearly 20 minutes ago, and they're still in my apartment. It was getting cold outside, so right now I'm waiting in the lobby. If anybody's wondering, no, I still haven't told them about the email. There was just no way. No way it could have been connected. But now I don't know. I really don't know. And I'm not sure what to expect from here. Story 3. When I was a kid, everyone I know played a horrible prank on me. This is something I should probably be speaking about with a therapist. I know. I would, or I have been, but that's not really an option anymore. In fact, I couldn't tell you how many times I've told this story to various medical professionals. I'm 30 now, 20 years since it happened. I just wanted to stop. I was a pretty average kid, I think. A little weird, but every kid is a little weird. I had an older sister, and we fought like 2 cats. I had a couple good friends, most of whom lived on my street or 1 street over, and we would meet after school and play until it was time for dinner. My life was fairly ideal. I played soccer, I think. Honestly, I have a lot of trouble remembering much of my childhood. But I remember that I got a Nintendo DS for my 10th birthday, and we had a big party in the backyard. Practically the whole neighborhood showed up. My birthday was just before school got out for the summer, so the air buzzed with excitement, and the evening was warm and felt more alive than other nights. The grown-ups started a fire in our little fire pit, and they sat around it and drank beer while we ran around. I was allowed to stay up past when I usually went to bed, and the other kids chased fireflies with me and roasted marshmallows until late. I remember going to bed happy, excited for summer, and exhausted. I fell asleep quickly, the peel-in stick glow in the dark stars and moon shining on the ceiling above my head. Waking up the day after my birthday, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. I hadn't had a nightmare, wasn't that? I had slept better than I could really remember ever sleeping. It was late. I realized that must be it. My mom usually woke me up around 8 if it wasn't a school day. She said it was a good habit to be in the routine of waking up early and starting your day on the right foot. By the light streaming in from my windows and the slightly muggy heat in the room, I figured it was already 10 a.m. or so. I smiled, sliding out of bed. It must have been one final birthday treat, letting me sleep in. She had let me sleep in the day before too, of course, although on my birthday itself, I had wanted to get up as early as possible. Mom, I called into the hallway, poking my head out the door. No answer. I frowned. It was Saturday, so my dad was definitely already at work, but my mom wouldn't be. My sister wouldn't be home either. She had left the night before to spend the night at her friend's house. She was 13 now, and allowed to have sleepovers, for which I was eternally jealous. I decided she must be out front in the garden. I put on a shirt and left my room. I smelled coffee, but there was none left in the pot. There were dishes in the sink, too, with remnants of egg stuck to a pan. It wasn't necessarily alarming, but it was strange. Even on days I slept in, there was always breakfast left over for me. I opened the front door, opening my mouth to call out to my mom, but I instantly froze. Halfway up our walkway was the mailman. He was on the ground, sprawled out awkwardly on the cement. Fresh blood pooled beneath him in a gruesome splatter. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. His limbs were bent at horrible angles, his face pointed away from me. It almost looked like some omnipotent force had lifted him into the air and then slammed him back down. The package he must have been delivering lay a few feet away, the cardboard dented and soaked in red. I didn't need any confirmation he was dead. It wasn't a question. I had never seen a dead person before. Sometimes my parents had watched horror movies, but that hardly counted. I backed into the house and closed the door behind me. My mind was racing too fast, and my heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. Everything in my body was reeling so much so that all I could do was move slowly in a faux sense of calm. Mom! I called out again into the silent house, my voice breaking. Mom, are you home? Something happened outside. Mom! No one answered. The house felt way too quiet. All I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. I had to brace myself against the wall as I made my way to my parents' room, because I was almost shaking too hard to hold myself up. Mom! I pushed open her bedroom door. It creaked, the sound almost deafening against the silence that blanketed the room. Our old gray cat, Gumbo, weaseled her way through the crack and slipped out into the hallway, brushing against my leg on her way. I saw a lump in the bed. For a moment, I thought it was just pillows, but then I realized it couldn't have been. The bed was made, and all the pillows were accounted for, leaning against the headboard. Mom, are you asleep? It came out as a whisper, even though it wasn't like I had been trying not to wake her up. I wanted her awake badly. I think I just somehow already knew. Something was hanging in the air, this heaviness, like the whole world had been blanketed in a thing that was empty and hot and dead. A desert popped into my head, a place that was so far away from everything and completely devoid of anything. Devoid of life. When I pulled back the covers, the shock washed over me like an electric zap. Every one of my veins and bones and muscles felt 20 degrees hotter than they should have been. There was blood everywhere. I could barely see any section of the sheets that wasn't soaked in it. It looked like the cherry juice we sometimes made from the tree in our backyard, squashing the berries with our hands and laughing as the sticky syrup trickled down our wrists. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was wide open, like she was about to scream. I gagged, stumbling backwards and almost falling down. My legs felt like they wouldn't work anymore. I was in a daze as I stumbled back to the kitchen. The eggs on the pan seemed like they were mocking me now. I knew my parents had told me what to do in an emergency, but all of that was gone from me now. This didn't feel like an emergency. It felt more like a horrible nightmare. I pinched myself on the arm, just in case. The neighbors, that was it. I was supposed to call my neighbors. The number was on a sticky note next to the phone. My fingers shook as I dialed the number. They picked up after 3 rings that felt like they took 1 year each. I heard a sort of crackling sound, like someone was moving the phone around. Hello. Hi. I cleared my throat, trying to get rid of the lump firmly lodged at the back of my tongue. This is Jackson from next door. I heard some sort of giggle, a choked one, like they were trying to hold it back, and then some hushed whispering. Hi, Jackson, the voice said. I assumed it was the mother, Mrs. Winston. Is everything all right? Can I help you with something? Something happened, my mom. Oh, honey, Mrs. Winston said, her tone gentle, but something about it felt deeply off. My stomach twisted. "Why don't you head on over here? HM? We'll figure out what's going on together." "Okay." I remember hanging up before she said anything else. Something about her voice was unnerving me. Still, I didn't know where else to go. I slipped out the back door, so I wouldn't have to walk past the mailman, Gumbo watching me go. I knocked on the neighbor's door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I stepped into the flower beds, peering in through the windows. Someone was lying on the couch, their head tilted back like they were staring up at the ceiling. For a moment, that was what I thought was happening, until I saw that their chest was opened up like a patient on a surgery table. All guts and organs and blood, so much blood. It was Mr. Winston, in his sweater vest and brown dad shorts. Dead like the mailman. Dead like my mom. Something came over me, and I burst through the front door. It was unlocked, which I hadn't really expected, so I went tumbling into the room, landing on my stomach, my face slamming into the floor. Face to face with Mrs. Wilson, who lay dead in front of the phone. Her eyes were open, too. There was a fly on one of them, crawling across the white, pausing every few seconds to rub its hands together. I had started to cry. It was finally hitting me that this was real, not some dream, and I desperately wanted my mom. I scrambled to my feet, nearly throwing up when I realized my face was covered in her blood. I swiped at it with my hands, trying to wipe it away as quickly as possible. Then, instinctively, I licked my lips. Horrified, I braced myself for the coppery taste of the blood on my tongue. But never came. It was sweet. I hesitated, trembling incessantly, before cautiously raising one of my red fingers to my lips. Sweet. Memories flooded my mind, memories of baking with my grandmother, the sweet syrup we would sometimes pour into the mixing bowls. It was fucking corn syrup. I ran to my father's work, which was on the other side of town. By the time I got there, I was close to passing out and drenched in sweat, but it had made it a little easier to get here with the road completely devoid of cars. There were some parked on the side of the road or every now and then in the middle of it, but none of them had people in them. Some of them had blood. Thick and red and gooey blood. The nice receptionist that was always at the front desk and always gave me candy when my dad brought me in had her head against the computer. Her hair was matted with red liquid, as if someone had ripped out entire chunks of her scalp. Before I could think too hard about it, I wiped my finger across the side of her head and licked it. It was sweet, too. I felt like my brain was going to break, like I was standing on the edge of something completely incomprehensible. I shook the woman. She flopped like a rag doll. I sobbed, shoving her, and she slumped to the ground, her head knocking against the tiles. "Wake up!" I screamed at her. "I know you're not dead." She didn't move an inch, just stared, unblinking, her mouth hanging half open. I ran into the room my dad usually worked in, scanning it for his workspace. I couldn't remember where it was, just that it was around halfway back and close to the wall. In every cubicle someone was dead. Sometimes they looked halfway peaceful, as if they'd been caught by surprise, but most of them were eviscerated in one way or another. Entrails hanging out, bones showing, blood sprayed against the walls, even some with faces ripped clean off. It was like something unseeable had swept through the town on a rampage. But all of their blood was made of corn syrup. In a brave moment, I even touched one of the organs, something that looked like a strange deflated balloon, and it jiggled, but more like plastic than a human body part. At one point I swore I heard a giggle behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. I found my dad at the water cooler, sitting against the wall, cone paper cup still gripped loosely in his hand. He stared straight ahead, blood leaking from his eyes, nose, and mouth, like he'd exploded from the inside. "Dad," I whispered, grabbing his shoulder. "This isn't funny. Please stop." There was a strange look on his face that I could just barely make out through the red. Almost like a smile. Like a smile someone would only make if they were trying very hard not to. I walked back home down the middle of the road, balancing on the yellow lines to have something to focus on, because I was fairly certain if I stopped walking, I wouldn't start again. When I got there, I climbed into bed and I closed my eyes. I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, after what must have been hours and hours of lying there, I drifted off into a restless sleep. I woke up to someone shaking my shoulder. I screamed, scrambling away from them, immediately wide awake and terrified. "Whoa!" My mom backed away, smiling. "Sorry, buddy. I didn't mean to scare you." I was breathing hard. I looked her over, clutching my chest. She was completely fine. She looked at it, at least. She stood there in a white blouse and blue jeans, her hair tied up like always, her eyes bright and happy. "What? What day is it?" Her smile faded, and she frowned a little. It was then that I noticed the smell of bacon wafting in from the kitchen. "It's Sunday, bud, remember? 2 days after my birthday. So yesterday was real." "What happened yesterday?" She placed the back of her hand on my forehead, tooting softly. "Did one of those neighborhood kids you play with get you sick, honey? Do you feel okay?" I dropped it because I didn't know what to say. I convinced myself maybe I really was sick, maybe it had been some kind of feverish hallucination. And I was so relieved to see her, I didn't want to think about any of it anymore. I went to eat breakfast, sitting at the table between my dad and my sister, and everything was normal. But when I left the house later that day, I saw it. On the walkway leading up to our house, there was something pink on the pavement, a faint pink stain like something sweet and red and sticky had been recently scrubbed away. Like I said, it's been 30 years. I've been feeling like I had almost recovered from that incident. I had asked everyone I knew countless times about that day, but none of them seemed to have any idea what I was talking about. But still, I had almost let it go, and it had never happened again. Not until today. Today, when I walked into my therapist's office, it seemed strangely quiet. There was usually music playing, something soothing and soft, and there were people in the waiting room and at the front desk typing on a keyboard. But today, nothing. No one. Silence. I let myself into Dr. Sheldon's office, perplexed, which is when I found her dead on the carpet, her blood sprayed across all the walls, even dripping from the ceiling. It was crazy, I know that, but I immediately tasted it. Sweet. I rolled her over, and her eyes were open, a strange smile on her face. This time I did something I didn't think to do as a kid. I checked her pulse. She's alive. I don't know what to do. I can't believe they're doing this to me again. Do they think this is funny? Story 4. Something woke up in room 237. I've always believed certain places absorb energy. Not just haunted castles or graveyards, but places where a lot of people pass through: airports, train stations, hotels. Especially hotel rooms. See, I used to work night security at one of the poshest hotels in Dublin City. 5 stars, marble floors, high-end clientele. That kind of place. You'd think nothing dark could touch it. But let me tell you, money doesn't stop the weird shit from creeping in. It started around 2:17 a.m. I remember because I was mid-yawn, flipping through the camera feeds, when the front desk patched a call through to security. A man's voice. Panicked. Breathless. "My wife's in the bath. I think she's not breathing." I snapped upright. Me and this other guard, Mark, rushed to room 237 on the 8th floor. The hallway was dead quiet. The kind of quiet that feels wrong, like the building itself is holding its breath. We pushed in. The guy was pacing around, soaked from the waist down. The bathroom door was wide open. I'll never unsee that moment. She was in the tub, completely still, water up to her shoulders, eyes open but not seeing. We dragged her out. I tried CPR. I was counting compressions under my breath while Mark gave breaths. Her skin was cold, like not just chilly cold like touching stone. I knew it was too late, but we had to try. Police arrived within minutes. The moment they stepped in, they told us to stop. One of the officers pulled me aside and said quietly, "She's been gone a while. A couple hours at least." The husband told them they'd argued earlier. He stormed out, came back, saw her in the bath, assumed she was just soaking, and went to bed. Said he only got suspicious when she didn't join him. No obvious signs of violence. No water overflow. No witnesses. They couldn't charge him. But between us staff, cops, even the paramedics, we all felt it. That gut pull. That something's off feeling. He checked out the next morning. Quiet. Calm. Not a single tear. Room 237 was locked off for 3 weeks. Housekeeping deep cleaned every inch. Management said, accidents happen. Life moves on. They reopened the room like nothing happened. No priest. No sage. Nothing. Just fresh linens and a new bar of soap. The first person to stay in that room after the death was this woman named Liz. She was a regular corporate client, staying at least once a month. She always asked for a high-floor room. She got 237 without knowing a damn thing. Next morning, 6:50 a.m., she's at the front desk with her suitcase, and it looks like she'd seen hell. I was walking past when she said, loud enough for guests to hear, "That room is haunted." I didn't sleep a second. Something's wrong with it. She said she kept hearing dripping water all night. Not just from the bathroom, like it was coming from the walls. At 3 a.m., the taps in the bathtub turned on by themselves. Full blast. She walked in and turned them off, soaking her slippers. Then, 5 minutes later, the shower started. She swore she hadn't touched anything. She said she kept smelling something floral, like old roses but rotten, like death wearing perfume. We offered her another room. She refused, said she was checking out for good. Never came back. After that, room 237 got a reputation internally. Guests kept requesting room changes after one night. Some didn't even last that long. There was this German businessman who called at 1:03 a.m., whispering like he didn't want someone to hear, "I think someone is in my bathroom." I asked if he saw anything. "No," he said, "but someone is coughing. A wet cough." I went up. The bathroom was empty, but the floor was damp. Towels crumpled in the corner. The toilet had been used, seat up, water moving like it had just flushed. The guy hadn't gone in all night. He checked out the next morning without breakfast. A honeymoon couple stayed there once. The woman came down at 4:12 a.m. in her pajamas, crying. She said she saw a pale woman standing at the foot of the bed, dripping wet, not moving, just staring. Her husband didn't see anything, but he confirmed the room temperature dropped 10 degrees in minutes. I checked the thermostat. It was set to 23 degrees Celsius. The room was at 14. No windows were open. I started dreading that room. Even walking past, it gave me this tightness in my chest, like I was being watched. I'd make rounds and literally speed walk past it. Once I was reviewing CCTV around 2:20 a.m., same time the original call had come in, and I saw something weird. The hallway camera outside 237 glitched, just for a second. But when I paused the footage and zoomed in, there was a shadow. Not a person, a shape, just outside the door, like someone was standing there, pressed against it. I replayed 100 times. Mark saw it too. "It's probably a compression error," he said, but his voice shook when he said it. Management refused to shut the room. They said we'd get sued if we told guests. Unless you see something tangible, it's superstition. So we kept assigning the room. But we started calling it the bathtub room behind closed doors. The cleaners hated it. They'd go in pairs. Even when nothing moved, the mirror always fogged up on its own. Once, one of the maids, Rosa, swore she saw the words "Don't leave me" written in the steam. But when she called her coworker over, it vanished. Guests who stayed more than one night always complained of water sounds. Dripping, running, gurgling, sometimes crying. One guy swore his sheets were damp every morning, like someone had gotten in the bed wet. Then came the worst night. 3:08 a.m. We get a call from room 237. The guest was an old man, a solo traveler. Very logical, very composed. He said, "Someone knocked on my bathroom door from the inside." Not once, 3 times. I sprinted up. When I opened the door, the room was empty. But the lights in the bathroom were flickering. Not just flickering, buzzing. And the bathtub faucet was trickling, just enough to hear. That's when I noticed it. There was water, not just in the tub. It was on the floor, in a straight line, like footprints, leading from the bath to the bed. But no one had walked. No one had opened the door. I put in my resignation a week later. Mark lasted a month more. He said he heard a woman humming in the elevator when he was alone. Hummed the same tune for 3 floors. When the doors opened, no one was there. Room 237 is still open, as far as I know. They just keep painting over the mold and turning the mattress. But something lives there now, or maybe something never left. Not every hotel room starts off haunted. Some of them become haunted, and I was there when it happened. Story 5. Frog Lake. I used to do small-scale construction work with a private firm out in rural Minnesota. Mostly private jobs. Someone needs a new deck or wants to build a guest house on the edge of their property. This isn't really the "I want a custom pool" kind of people. They're more like, I need a fence to protect from swine migration. We were contacted by a company that worked with the government on a larger environmental project. The money for it had been earmarked for years, but for one reason or another, now they decided to pull the trigger. I guess they were afraid their funding would get cut before they got the chance to finish, so they pulled in every contractor in the area to help. And that's where I come in. Me and my crew had never worked on an environmental project before. We didn't even know what that really meant. They were offering good money, though, so we figured we'd hear them out. My boss, Brogan, had a meeting with one of their reps. It took about 30 minutes. Then he just stepped out, gave us a nod, and stated, "We're doing this." We got set up in an apartment complex on the outskirts of a small Minnesota town called Tomskog. There was this little welcome sign with a blue sunflower on it. Strange place. Not as an outright hostile, but you see things that make you stop and think. Like how there's always a guy waiting for the bus, or how there's this one apartment that always keeps an open window. Little things like that. Me and the crew were set up in small, fully furnished temp apartments. The project had a timeline of 2 months of intense work, so we had our jobs cut out for us. Our employer was a subsidiary of a larger company with a big hatchet for a logo, and they were pulling out all the stops. I saw trucks with the company logo rolling through town 24/7. My boss was nowhere near the top of the hierarchy. We're talking a crew of, well, over 200 people pulled from all ends of the state. Mostly private contractors, but at least 40 or so were in-house company hires. You could tell by the color of their hard hats. We were told the project was a conservation effort. The town and the nearby area had been riddled with various invasive species, and this was a last-ditch effort to keep it from spreading. It wasn't clear what kind of invasive species we were talking about, but I figured it was frogs. The place was crawling with them. Big fat ones that looked like cow turds. We got set up around a part of town called Frog Lake. A lot of locals weren't too happy about it, so we had to put up fences. No one could get in or out. We had armed guards patrolling the perimeter. We had to block off a trail going all around the lake, which caused a bit of a stir. There was also the issue of restricting road access. A lot of residential houses were lined up around that lake, so we had to dig temporary roads to provide highway access. That was part of my immediate responsibilities, heavy machinery. Digging mostly. After the first week, they'd cornered off a specific part of the lake. We were working on building sandbanks, allowing us to effectively separate a corner of the lake from the rest. I wasn't clear on why exactly we were doing it, but being knowledgeable wasn't part of the contract. I just had to drive the hardware and go where I was told. Then they brought in the pumps. 4 industrial-sized water pumps. They were going to drain a corner of the lake. That's why we separated it. I had no idea how this might help some kind of conservation effort, but there were far more educated people than me on site that knew what they were doing. At least I think they did. They looked the part. Day 10, the pumps got going. The trucks going in and out of town were replaced with water tanks. Once the water levels began to sink, I started seeing men in white hazmat suits going down into the banks with gas tanks on their backs. They were dousing the lake with a kind of chlorine gas. You could smell it all the way into town. They must have killed tens of thousands of frogs with that. That didn't help them much, though. You know the water pumps? They got jammed constantly. You know how many frogs got to swim into a water pump to bypass the pump filters and clog it? So many that you start to think it's not an accident anymore. So many, in fact, that you start to think they want to die. The mechanics were working overtime. I mean, even more overtime than the rest of us. But week 2, that corner of the lake was drained. I was taking off heavy-duty work to check the infrastructure. Turns out, the bottom of the lake wasn't quite as empty as one might have imagined. In fact, there was an entire building left down there on the very bottom. It kind of looked like a church. Brogan came up to me one day on my lunch break. He sat down next to me as we looked down at the drained lake. There were still guys in white pushing chlorine gas. We'd gotten used to the smell by then. Brogan offered me the bottom half of his sandwich. I told him no mayo, he sighed. It's like this town has it out for us. They're not big fans, I said. There's always a couple lined up around the fence. They're just curious, he said, shrugging it off. But yeah, I don't suppose they're eager to have us here. I figure they would be. I mean, we're dealing with a problem, right? Brogan didn't answer. He just turned his attention back to the lake pit and took a swig of his Gatorade. I didn't press the question. He explained that I was going down there to help the construction crew. They were considering what to do with the church, and in the meantime, they needed some work done. Some stairs going into the lake, a rail to hold on to, and a couple of construction trailers for the on-site crew. They were already rolling in a crane, and they were flattening the ground into a ramp to allow trucks to go down. It was a massive undertaking. I ended up working on the stairs for a couple of days until I heard a guy call out that they needed someone with interior safety experience. The guy had a blue hat, so he was a company man. I figured I might get a bonus, so I volunteered. I have more certifications than I care to recite, and he just needed someone to check the once submerged church to see if it was safe to inspect. So in a twist of fate, that was my new assignment. This church was bigger than you think. The whole thing had been submerged in that lake for God knows how long. There was a bell tower, but the bell was long since gone. From a quick outside check, it looked sturdy enough, almost like the water had preserved it. Whoever built it had done one hell of a job making sure the wood wouldn't rot straight through. When I finally made the call to go inside, I have to admit, I was frightened. The place was airtight, and there was so much algae buildup that all the light got swallowed. All I had was a flashlight and the headlamps of a curious crew peering through the front doors. I was surprised the pews were still there. I could see the altar and the cross. There were doors leading further in, but the walls were so covered in natural wear and tear that you could barely make them out from the rest of the wall. I figured I shouldn't press my luck until I'd assessed the structural integrity. It was a strange building. If you ignore the multitudes of frogs lurking under the pews, the ceiling itself had a couple of unusual details. It seemed that the entire building was built to withstand staying underwater for prolonged periods of time. It was almost as if whoever made it had anticipated this thing would sink. Almost as if that was the intent all along. I had to battle for space with a variety of frogs, but eventually I made the call that the building was safe enough to traverse. Not so much that we could set up heavy machinery, but enough that we could have a couple of people move through it at any given time. I was charged with setting up some construction lights and a steel-grated floor. I thought I was going to work alone until the basic safety measures were put up, but that didn't turn out to be the case. One morning, when I entered the church, there was already someone there. She was around my age and wore a white hard hat, signaling government officials rather than a big wig or private contractor. She wore bright clothes as a contrast to her darker skin, but had these almost unnaturally bright eyes. You could tell she was a bit of a big deal, though. She wasn't covered in mud like the rest of us, and she had an iPad for a clipboard. But more than anything else, she had a smile that could burn straight through a stone. The first time she looked at me, it felt like staring into the sun. "Hi there," she said. "I'm Eva." "Hey there," I said, introducing myself. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to assess your work," she said. "You know what it's like. One man digs, 3 foremen check the shovel for damages. 2 more sketch up insurance claims. Don't I know it? So you're babysitting then? For now, just pretend like I'm not here." Easier said than done. I hadn't expected it to come off as flirty, but it did. She didn't seem to mind, though, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear without breaking eye contact. A man could fall in love with less. Eva helped me a little when she was around, mostly with setting up the graded floor. Without it, it felt like walking on black ice. One wrong step would send you to the ER with a displaced shoulder. As we worked, we make small talk about a little of everything. Previous jobs we'd worked, craziest client stories, the usual shtick. She seemed to be more of a desk jockey, not having all too many stories of her own. She enjoyed listening to mine, though. "I think it's great we're doing this," she added. "I wanted to see this place for a long time." "I thought we were here for the frogs," I said. "Environmental project, right?" "Right," she agreed. "But I still wanted to see this place." "Do you know anything about it?" "Scandinavian settler church, early 19th century. They were here long before the Homestead Act, so they were eager, to say the least. It's strange, right? How did they build it to survive being submerged? Many coastal communities prepared for flash flooding. They took that with them when they moved inland. I gave her a curious look as she rolled her eyes. "So I like history. Sue me. I don't think that's a criminal offense. Maybe civil." She snorted and shook her head. As we secured more of the church over a couple of days, I started seeing less of Eva. I figured she had tons of people to keep in check, and had used her time with me as a sort of break. It's one thing to handle an entire team in need of management and oversight, and another thing to keep an eye on one stubborn man with a screwdriver. Still, I begun to look forward to seeing her there. If I'm honest, it was the best part of my day. I'd done some more work reinforcing a couple of frames around the windows. I got word that they were going to take them out entirely, just plop them out of the frame. Brogan wasn't saying it outright, but it seemed they were either going to demolish the whole building or dismantle it to a point where it'd be unrecognizable. It was a bit sad. This thing had been standing for well over 100 years, and now it was going down without an explanation. I couldn't imagine this was all because of the frogs. Hell, most of them were dead. You could hardly smell the chlorine anymore. I noticed someone having broken down the doors to the back of the church. It was the one part I'd been asking for confirmation to do, so someone must have gotten to it before I did. Figuring I had to go ahead to check, I did a bit of exploration on my own. The back of the church had a storage area and a staircase leading up to the old bell tower. There was a small space for the priest to prepare sermons and keep records. It was incredible in a way. Although most of the furniture had rotted away, you could tell what was supposed to go where. There was a corner meant for a desk and a chair, and right next to it there were bookshelves. Most of them were still intact. No books, though. I set up a couple more lights there, only to realize I wasn't alone. I turned to see Eva standing at the entrance with a flashlight. "Just so you know, we don't have clearance to go in yet," she said. "So this might get us in a bit of trouble." I looked at her, but she didn't budge. She wasn't about to move anytime soon. "You don't seem to mind," I noted. "Not yet," she smiled. "I must admit, I'm curious about this place. I feel like it's telling a story. An old one, for sure. For sure." We opened the door to the bell tower staircase. The stairs were absolutely demolished, but there was a path leading into a cellar. There was something bright down there, making me think someone had already been down to set up lights. Eva tapped me on the shoulder. "You mind if I ask you something?" she said. "Is it true they're planning to bring this place down?" "That's more your pay grade than mine," I said. "I just go where I'm told." "I know, but I'm just being paid to double-check things. I'm not really in the loop." "Well, they're taking down the windows," I explained. "They thought about dismantling the front rooms. The entrance in that, mini-room. The narthex," she said. "It's called the narthex. Sounds like a Star Trek alien." She snorted again, almost choking on her spit. After our talk, I did some digging. I talked to my boss and a couple of the heavy machinery guys, and they all had the impression that the church was about to go down. It was just going to take a lot of work, and the ground wasn't prepared for it yet. They couldn't risk the place being flooded while housing multi-million-dollar industrial equipment. I questioned the need to destroy an old church in a preservation effort for an environmental project, but by now it was a sort of known secret that we were doing something else entirely. I was just there to do a job, and all of it seemed to be perfectly legal, but it still didn't feel right. It's like having your tooth pulled. No matter how gentle the dentist, it's still uncomfortable. The next time I met Eva, she put on these thick white gloves and sorted through old wooden debris. I told her about the plans I'd heard, and how none of them seemed all that reliable. The only people who knew for sure were the higher-ups. I didn't really have a timeline or action plan, but they were indeed bringing trucks down to do some heavy lifting. You didn't do that for nothing. As I finished explaining, she walked up to me. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate the effort." She leaned in and gave me a kiss on the cheek. I was so surprised. I turned to her, not knowing what to say. As I did, I got another kiss, this time on the lips. I think it was accidental, but she didn't seem to mind. She hurried off before I could get another one. She had this violet-scented perfume that lingered on me long after she left, making my lips tingle. Or maybe that was my heart. Impossible to tell. Going home that night, something didn't feel right. My stomach kept churning, like my intestines were constantly moving. I kept burping as if someone had carbonated my insides. I could hear a rasping noise every time I exhaled. At first, I thought it was a fungal infection. You can get those around old buildings. I didn't get much sleep. I kept rushing to the bathroom, coughing up this salty black sludge that lingered at the back of my throat. I shone a light in my mouth through the bathroom mirror, and I could see these little dark spots on my tonsils. Even just standing there, tilting my head back, I could feel pressure on my throat, like my blood was thicker. A sort of growing pain. It's hard to explain. I knew I'd fucked up when I heard frogs croak outside. The sun was already rising. I was feeling better, but I was going to have to take a sick day. You don't do well on a construction site with less than 2 hours of sleep. When I returned to the dig a day later, they'd already begun taking out the windows. It seems they'd abandoned the idea of picking them out of the frame and just gone straight to breaking them. There was a man with a steel pipe standing on a ladder, smashing panel after panel. I could hear the glass as it clattered to the ground inside, crashing against the grated steel floor. Feeling better? Brogan asked. I hadn't noticed him approaching, so maybe I wasn't all there yet. I still gave him a thumbs up. Good, he continued. Don't need more people getting sick. Are there others? Are you kidding me? He chuckled. Got 2 drivers with a fever and one who's not answering his phone. You need me to chip in? Nah, I need you working the interior. Bring out the pews, all loose shit. Gotta clear it for the dozer. I spent most of the day waiting by the stairs, watching a couple of frogs struggle to get out of the mud. Weeks of chemical spraying, and there were still frogs around. Maybe there really was an invasive species problem. When they called for a break, I went ahead and headed down. It was strange seeing the place in the light of day. Usually, all sunlight got stuck in the algae-covered windows. I brought a crowbar and cracked one of the back pews. I only managed to get one solid push in before there was a tap on my shoulder. Eva. I'd been so focused on my work that I hadn't seen her come in. I could still smell that violet perfume on her. I want to show you something, she said, lowering her voice. You got to see this. Now, I'm not one to slack on the job, but we were ahead of schedule, and Eva, I couldn't help but listen to her. She went for the basement, leading the way with a shoulder light. I was a bit hesitant about going downstairs, not wanting to slip and tumble down. I'd bowl her over like a pin, and then I'd have some explaining to do. It turned out fine, though. The stairs were solid stone. There was something bright down there, but there were no lamps. It was an ambient light coming from somewhere further in. I wasn't sure about the whole thing, but Eva urged me on. She didn't hesitate for a moment. I checked out the other day, she said. You weren't around, so I figured I'd keep busy. You miss me? I asked half-jokingly. I think I did. A little. We came to the bottom of the stairs. It must have been a sort of storage cellar at one point, but most of it had eroded. I could barely make out anything in the debris. It smelled like dry seaweed and mud. And something else. Something flowery. Watch your step, she said. It's right up ahead. There was a fissure. It stretched from the layered stone wall and into the ground. About 8 feet long, 3 feet across. That's where the light came from. A soft cyan light, shimmering with streaks of bright purple. It had this strange organic pattern, like the inside of corn cob. It was mesmerizing. I tried speaking 3 times, but I could just make noises. My throat throbbed a little. Finally, I formed the words carefully enough to let them out of my mouth. What the hell is it? It's what they want to destroy, Eva said. You mean we want to destroy? I added. I looked at Eva, but she said nothing. Finally, she put a hand on my cheek. No, she insisted. They, not us. She leaned in to kiss me. This time, it was no accident. Not even close. And as much as I loved her soft touch, something felt wrong. A tickle on my lips, like kissing a nettle. You're not one of us, I whispered. Are you? I'm not. Are you from town? Did you make it over the fence? I'm not from town. There was no more room for more questions. Just soft touches, kisses, and rationalizing. It's amazing how many things you're ready to tell yourself at the sight of a pretty face. Over the next few days, it all sort of turned into a sort of routine. I would go to work, do my job at the church, and meet up with Eva during the slow hours. We'd hide away in the cellar and just spend time together. Sometimes cuddling, sometimes talking. She told me about her overprotective father and how he always kept an eye on her. She told me about a cousin of hers who owned a vineyard in France. Little bits and pieces of a life that seemed long and arduous. Very different from her otherwise soft demeanor. I'd have a bite to eat and go back to my company-assigned temp apartment. There, I'd either crash instantly or stay up, unable to sleep. Sometimes I'd be sick. Sometimes I'd have my head swimming with pictures or thoughts. It's not like insomnia. It was more like I forgot to be tired. I would end up being bored more than anything. And every time it happened, I wished Eva could be there. Everything felt better with her around. But then one day, They went ahead with the demolition. I wasn't informed. I just got to the site, and it was underway. They'd been working on a ramp for a long time, and now they had it. They brought down a bulldozer and started working through the vestibule and the narthex. Despite standing for over 100 years, the building was going down. There was no stopping it. I could feel my pulse rise as I realized they had no idea that Eva might be down there. There was a crowd standing on the bank of the lake, but I couldn't see Brogan anywhere. I didn't know what got into me, but I pushed through the crowd and grabbed the first important-looking company man I could find. "You gotta stop," I said. "There's someone in the basement." "What? The basement?" I repeated. "There's someone down there." "What basement?" "The basement under the church. The cellar, it's Dash." Before I could continue, the bulldozer plowed on. And as it did, I could hear an eerie sound. Something gave way as the floor cracked. The settlers had planned for a lot, but they hadn't planned for a multi-ton steel machine to roll over their floors. In a matter of seconds, the bulldozer broke through and tipped forward, leaving only the back of it sticking out of the ground. The crowd gasped as men with colorful helmets hurried to help. They managed to get the driver out, but the floor had collapsed. It was a mess. Most of the front of the church was gone, and the bulldozer had gone too far too quickly. The walls were still sturdy, but they were going to come down soon enough. They'd have to find a way to get the bulldozer out and go at it from another angle. All the while, my heart kept pounding away, thinking about Eva being down there. She could be dead, crushed. I tried to get through, but it was chaos. EMTs were on site to check out the driver, and people were being dispersed. They were calling full stop on all heavy-duty work in the lake for now as they reassessed the situation. I waited for an opportunity to slip by. I skipped dinner, just standing there, waiting. It wasn't until later in the evening when I finally saw an opening. We had armed guards patrolling the area, but they were usually busier with looking for outside threats, especially during early rotation. As soon as they started to fan out, I slipped down to the church, right by the bulldozer, and down the stairs. "Eva," I called out. "Eva, you in here?" It didn't take long for me to spot her. Looking past the collapsed floor and bulldozer, she was sitting further in, right next to the fissure, letting her feet dangle into it. The light danced on her face, sending ripples across her skin. She didn't seem to notice I was even there. "We gotta go," I said. "You can't stay here. They're bringing it down. All of it." "I got nowhere else to go," she said. She didn't look up. I noticed she was leaning a little too far ahead. Was she about to jump into the fissure? "You can come with me. Come on." I offered her a hand. She took it, looking up at me. "You sure?" she asked. "Of course. Let's go." I pulled her up. She had this hopeful smile that reminded me of the sun peeking through storm clouds. We made it all the way up the stairs and out the front, ducking under the crumbling church entrance. Eva couldn't bring herself to look at the chaos, so she kept her head down. We made it all the way out to the open sky before we had to stop. There were people up ahead. The guards were back on rotation, and one of them had spotted us emerging from the rubble. He was maybe 40 feet away, but the site was quieter without all the machines running. He could probably hear us long before he saw us. "You're not supposed to be down there," he called out. "What the hell are you doing?" "She was someone stuck in the basement." I called back. "It's not safe." He clicked his flashlight and shone a light on us. It was blinding, and I couldn't see his face, but I could hear something in his tone shift. It went from confident and authoritative to trembling in an instant. Something happened, and in the next moment, he called out for help on his walkie-talkie. I turned to Eva as spotlights flared. One by one, they went up, covering the entire site in a pale, industrial glow. But there were no commands, just panicked voices. Screams. Someone calling out a code, someone calling out confirmation. Eva looked at me in disbelief, struggling to find the right words. "Do something," one of the guards called out. "Fucking do something." Then, gunshots. My eyes were on Eva when the first bullet hit. I saw it enter right above her heart. And as I blinked, something changed. Eva wasn't standing there any longer. I was looking at something else. Something large, maybe 6 feet wide, 8 feet tall. A dozen tendril-like legs sprawled in all directions. A single vaguely humanoid arm unfurled into an unreal 5-jointed mess of a limb. A body of contracting and expanding rubber-like sacs, lined with pulsing blue veins, like a bowl of noodles held together by fishing wire. And on the side, the decayed head of a long-dead woman, hanging to the side like an afterthought, a thin sliver of hair hanging from the remains of a scalp, all of it breathing like a dying balloon. Another gunshot, then another. I blinked with every blast and watched her change in front of me. In one moment, I saw her as I knew her. In the next, I saw that unworldly thing. She fell to her knees, screaming for help. In the next breath, I'd hear this awful croaking, like a bullfrog in an undulating tunnel. But the image I remember the most was that of the Eva I knew. This soft, beautiful person being riddled with gunshots, reaching for me. And when I didn't reach back, the betrayal was painted on her face just as true as the bullet holes in her chest. She spoke, and when she did, there was no pain in her voice. And no matter how she looked, the voice stayed the same from one breath to another. "This was your plan, wasn't it?" she said. "To get me outside, make me vulnerable." I covered my head. They were calling for help. Someone was bringing a rifle. I could hear an engine in the distance. Eva looked up. In another form, her skull rotated upwards, looking at the sky. "Father!" she cried. "Father!" I crawled backwards, slipping in the mud. One person was firing a large caliber rifle, stopping only to reload. It didn't faze her in the slightest. I couldn't make out where everything was coming from. I could just see the many lights and the blinking gunfire. My ears rang, but I could barely hear it over my own pulse. It had been cloudy all day. I hadn't thought about it, but as Eva looked up, so did I. And up there, in the clouds, I could see something move. A swirl, as if something stirred. And in a moment that stopped my breath, I saw the dark clouds part. And I looked down. An impossibly large, ceaseless, alien eye. It's impossible to describe that sensation. It's not just the scale, it's the unrealness of it. You can't make sense of what you're seeing. No matter how many monster movies you see, or how many books you read, imagination can only get you so far. But to lay there with dirt on your hands and feeling the rush of the wind as the sky itself changes, as it breaks the rules, is something else entirely. You know your life won't be the same after that. You are reminded that you being alive is nothing but chance and happenstance. And in that moment, I've never felt more human. I made it out of the drained lake as the first drops of rain started to fall. They were backing up at the truck, preparing to do some kind of last-ditch maneuver. Maybe run her over. The eye in the sky slowly turned, looking at something to my right-hand side. There was a feeling in the air, like a sudden warmth washing over us. Then I saw a man come undone. One of our on-site guards. His body broke like a cheap gas station wrap as frogs spilled out of him, climbing over one another and dropping haplessly to the ground. Another man next to him followed suit, leaving behind only patches of skin and entrail-stained clothes. Some people started running. The eye turned, silencing another voice. The man driving the truck threw himself out of the driver's seat and ran for the front gates, screaming at the top of his lungs. A cold, panicked shriek. Humans aren't meant to sound like that. Then the eye turned to me. I could feel something expanding in my chest. My lungs refused to exhale. I was swelling from the inside out. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't think at all. I couldn't even scream. And as I stared into that impossible thing, I didn't know what to say or do. I could just flail my arms and roll around in the dirt. I was completely, fundamentally powerless. Then it stopped. It turned its attention downward, to Eva. She said something, but all I could hear was my heart. Moments later, the eye closed. The site was abandoned. There was an alarm blaring in the distance. But for a moment, it was just me and Eva on opposite sides. Me up above, her down below. And for a final time, I saw her as she wanted to be seen. A bullet-ridden woman slipping back into the basement of the church and disappearing into the fissure below. Not a word spoken. The rain whipped into a downpour. The lake was flooded, putting what remained of the building back underwater. Our spotlights couldn't pierce the murky surface, making it look impossibly deep. I sat there watching the hundreds, maybe thousands of frogs diving back into the waters and retreating into the dark below. The rain soaked me, washing the dirt from my hands. I must have been there for hours before the armed guards pulled me away. They handcuffed me and put me in the back of a black car. They spent the next few days asking me a lot of uncomfortable questions, and I answered them truthfully. By the end of it, they gave me an ultimatum: to go home and shut up, or to stay in the dark and talk as much as I wanted. They made no promises except that I'd be doing myself a lifelong disservice if I didn't comply. So I made a deal. It wasn't that long ago, I suppose. The days tend to meld together when you can't figure out your sleep. I haven't told the company about how I've been feeling lately. At night, things have gotten worse. The swelling in my throat, the strange insomnia. I've noticed this sort of horizontal slit in my eyes. I got this blind spot that I can't explain, like my eyes are drifting to the side of my head. And sometimes I wake at night hearing frogs croaking, but it's not coming from outside. I look different in the mirror. I feel different. I felt different ever since that first kiss. And I know I should feel disgusted, or angry, or scared, but I feel nothing but warmth thinking about Eva and our time together. Yes, even now, I can't help it. As of writing this, my fingers are secreting a mild adhesive, making the keys break loose from the keyboard. I have a softness forming around my neck like a pouch or a sack. I think I know what's happening, and in some strange way, I think I'm okay with it. The lake is still fenced off. Brogan and the crew still work there. For what I understand, they're exploring different options, but they're still hell-bent on breaking that building and taking control of the site. I'm not entirely sure why, but it seems to be a priority worth dying for. There are still trucks running through that little town. I've moved far away. I get a small check in the mail every week, and as long as I keep quiet, I suspect I'll get more. But I'm afraid I'm at a point where I can't show myself in public anymore. I can't recognize myself in the mirror. I can barely understand my own voice. And to this day, there's a part of me that wants to go back. I want to dive into the deep waters, to kick my legs out and just indulge. I want to see Eva for who she is. I want to hold her and be held. And then, only then, will everything be okay. Everything. Story 6. 3 months after my wife's funeral, she started calling every night at 2:13 a.m. The call started 3 months after the funeral. Same time every night. Same voice. Lock the door twice, she whispers. And don't answer if it isn't me. Click. I do what she says. I always did, even when she was alive and already leaving me. She loved someone else in the end. A woman. The kind who holds your hand and robs you blind with her other one. They thought I didn't know. They thought I didn't see the second toothbrush, the softened lies, the long showers after Pilates. They thought I didn't read the messages. They thought I wouldn't taste the wine. I did. I swallowed. I smiled. I asked for another glass. I've always been good at playing dead. They did it the gentle way. Candles, music, poison with a fruit note. She sat close and told me I'd go in my sleep, and her girl stood behind her with the kind of smile you use to put a dog to rest. I closed my eyes at the right time. Let my pulse go soft. Let my breath go thin. Let guilt do half their work for them. They drove me in the dark. They cried the right tears. They laid me by water and held hands and told each other they were brave. And when they left, I got up. I walked home with wet shoes and a throat full of metal and the moon hanging there like an open eye. I unlocked my own door twice and sat in my own chair until morning. When she came in and saw me, she pressed a hand to her chest like a cliché. She made a small sound. She folded to the floor. The doctors called it a heart attack. Her girl didn't scream. She kissed me on the mouth and tasted like rosemary and crime. Told you you'd come back, she said. Because here's the part my wife never learned. Her girl was mine first. We planned it quietly. Months before the poison. She slid into my messages and I let her. She rehearsed the lines with me and then sold them to my wife. She chose the wine, the dosage, and the song. I chose the night. It was a simple plan. Let them kill me, come back wrong. Let guilt finish what the bottle started. She'd always had a bad heart. The surgeon said so when she was 22. She kept her pills in a white ceramic bowl that said blessed on it. She was careful with everything except me. Locked the door twice. The dead woman begs me now every night. I do. Out of habit. Out of love. Out of something meaner than both. People ask what grief feels like. It feels like power when you stop pretending you need forgiveness. I kept the house. I kept the car. I kept the rosemary my wife's lover planted on my windowsill the week after the funeral, because I like the way it smells when I cut it. Sometimes at 2:13 a.m., the phone rattles on the nightstand and I answer. You were supposed to love me, she says. Why are you still with her? I tell her the truth. Because you taught me exactness. Because you taught me to check the locks. Because you made me practice being alone. And then you left me with someone who hates to be. Click. In the morning, I make eggs in her old pan. The girl pads out of my bedroom. Our bedroom. Wraps herself in my wife's robe and laughs when I set 2 plates down like some suburban priest. Do you think she still calls? She says. Every night. I say. The girl kisses my cheek and steals my fork because stealing is how she says I love you. We don't talk about the water. We don't talk about the wine. We don't talk about how easy it is to teach someone how to kill you if you promise them it's mercy. We do talk about locks. 2 turns. Always 2. Before you judge me, understand this. I didn't make my wife plan my death. I just stopped getting in the way when she wanted to be free. I let her believe the poison would do it clean. I let her believe guilt wouldn't. And when she fell, I didn't catch her. I answered the phone instead. Don't answer if it isn't me, she pleads. Please. I always answer you. I tell the dead. I just don't do what you say. Last week, the girl asked if I ever feel haunted. I said, only when I forget the rules. What rules? Lock the door twice. Don't drink from anyone you don't plan to bury. Don't give away what you can take. And if a phone rings after midnight, don't answer if it isn't me, she finished grinning. She knows how to speak my language. She's fluent in we. If you want a happy ending, there isn't one. There's just a kitchen at night, and a phone that rings at 2:13, and a man who picks it up because he likes to hear a ghost learn the shape of his silence. There are 2 plates in the sink and 2 locks on the door, and 2 people who sleep fine because we earn it the ugly way. Sometimes the dead ask for apologies. Sometimes she asked me to leave the girl. Sometimes she asked what I did with the bottle, the car, the second toothbrush, the blessed bowl. Where is she? She sobs once. Where did you put her? She's right here, I say, and watch my lover walk past my chair in my wife's robe to lock the door twice. The line goes quiet. Then the slow breath of someone who can't help loving me wrong. Watch out, she whispers finally. I smile into the dark. We wrote the rules.